Good evening. Thank you for attending the February 10th, 2025 meeting of the Westerville Schools Board of Education. This evening's agenda will be displayed on the screens in the front of the room. Printed agendas are in the back on the table for our guests, or you might find the agenda on your mobile device by connecting to the district's website at www.wcsoh.org. Click on our district, select Board of Education, and then follow the board docs link to our current meeting agenda. There will be an opportunity for public comment this evening. There's a sign-up sheet located on the table in the back of the room. Each speaker will have 3 minutes to address the board, and a timer will be shown on the screen in the front. This portion of the meeting shall be limited to no more than 60 minutes. And with that, Ms. Marshall, will you please take the roll?
Mrs. Altman?
Here.
Mrs. Davidson?
Here.
Mrs. Valentine?
Here.
Mrs. Liebran?
Here.
Mrs. Meyer?
Here. Would you please join us in the Pledge of Allegiance? Next up, we have district highlights and recognitions, and I'm going to turn it over to my colleagues, Ms. Valentine and Ms. Liban.
All right. Well, good evening, everyone. We have some amazing recognitions to do tonight. This is always the fun part. We get to do it at the beginning and start the board meeting off right. So I would like to invite the following students to join us up front. Mariah Chafin from Westerville North, Andrew Gould, Andrew Tran, Caleb Tran, Ben Pipo, Cameron Shadley, and Maya Varkudai from Westerville Central, and Colin Fowler and Paige Veligal from Westerville South. So these high school students are recipients of the 2025 MLK Faust Award, which recognizes Westerville students in grades 6 through 12 who have demonstrated tolerance, respect for others, and bravery in the face of adversity, or whose actions have inspired change in their school community and beyond. The award honors the memory of William H. Faust, the first black graduate of Westerville's two-year high school in 1884. They were formally recognized during the 19th annual Westerville Martin Luther King Jr. celebration in January.
Mariah received the award for her leadership work at Westerville North, especially with the Black History Month program. She has been involved in the annual production since her freshman year. She was also a lead actor as a sophomore and has been co-director as a senior and junior. She's also the second in her family to receive the award. Her sister Maya received the award in 2022. The other recipients of the Faust Award are the 8 members of Genoa Middle School's 2022-23 Future City team, all of whom are currently high school sophomores. They were recognized for the Future City project they started in the 8th grade and have continued to work on long after the competition ended. Their project focused on designing a sustainable city of the future that showcased their solution to climate change. They took an authentic approach to their theme, building a city for a nomadic African community that wants to settle in one place but have limited access to food, water, and housing. As 8th graders, they worked with international, state, and local partners to deepen their understandings of the Ma community's needs. They met virtually with representatives from Globally Reconnect, which serves as a facilitator for mission-driven work across communities. They then connected with Ohio State University's Engineers Without Borders students to learn more about accessing reliable, clean water sources and building sustainable housing for the Ma tribe. The team placed second overall in the Future City competition in 2023, amazing, earning first in the ceramics and infrastructure categories and as a runner-up in recreation. Since then, they've continued their work with the Ma community partnering with the Rotary Club of Westerville to raise money for their efforts and working towards bringing their innovations conceived during their Future City competition to reality. We want to congratulate these impressive group of students on their achievements and thank them for their part in making the world a more inclusive and kinder place. I also want to acknowledge Dawn Sayer, principal at Westerville Central, Shayna Wade Argus, assistant principal at Westerville North, Scott Gatus, my apologies, principal at Genoa Middle School, Tina Bardwell, a science teacher at Genoa, Linda Amiki, a middle school instructional coach, and Mike Hinsey, principal at Westerville South, as well as family members who are in the audience this evening. Thank you.
Well, congratulations again. This is such an exciting part of the evening always. Next up, we have reports. Oh, my apologies, I didn't see it. Okay, so 3.2, this is also exciting part of the night, our winter graduation. Ms. Baldwin.
Good evening, President Meyer, members of the board, Superintendent Hamburg, Mrs. Marshall. We're so excited this evening to recognize our students who have completed all of their graduation requirements and are official after this evening alumni of Westerville City Schools. And we do have one graduate that is here with us tonight that we will be celebrating, and I'm going to ask Ms. Wade Argus from Westerville North to share a little bit more about her.
Good evening, everyone, and my name is Shayna Wade Argus. I'm one of the assistant principals at Westerville North. On behalf of our principal, Mr. Kurt Yancey, and the rest of the administrative team, we'd like to congratulate our graduate, Ikran Malin, this evening. She is graduating early as she has earned all of her credits in advance. She will spend the rest of the semester working part-time with her father in his medical practice, as well as working part-time at Graders, everyone's favorite. In the fall, she plans to pursue her initial degree from Columbus State before transferring to Ohio State, where she plans to study neuroscience. So congratulations, Ikran. You've done a great job, and you're out of here early. Make sure you come back and visit us. Come on up.
Okay, that was the exciting part of our evening tonight. Next up, we have reports. And so we have 4.01. They are all our kids. Mr. Reeves, welcome.
Thank you, and good evening. This is a presentation that I am very honored to give several times. I'm giving it a couple times on WE Day, and I've given a few, and it really answers some of the misconceptions that people in our community have about the kids we educate, who we educate, where we educate them, and why we educate. So put this presentation together to hope that some of the folks, after they hear it, have a better understanding of the footprint of our school district. And so the big question that we get is, why do the majority of students who attend Westerville City Schools live outside of the city of Westerville? And I will tell everyone listening to challenge their beliefs, because people think that they know who we educate and why we educate them, and have their misconceptions of why we're educating kids from certain areas, and I'm going to challenge that. And so when you look at that, the place that people gravitate to the most is the city of Columbus. They always fixate on, why are we educating kids from the city of Columbus? But when you look at all of the jurisdictions that we educate students from the village of Minerva, Blendon Township, Plain, Sharon, Genoa Townships, and also the city of Westerville. 7 different jurisdictions altogether. In fact, we have 3 school buildings that are in Minerva Park, France, and Hawthorne. We have 2 buildings in Blendon Township, in Huber and Wilder, and we have 4 buildings in Genoa Township, in Faust Alcott Central High School and Genoa Middle School, none of which are in the city of Westerville. Of our 23 traditional K-12 buildings, 9 of them are not in the city of Westerville. And to kind of understand the background of why we have such a wide footprint is to understand the development and the construction of our townships. We became a state in 1803, and one of the earliest governance systems that we got from an English tradition was dividing our state into roughly 6-mile by 6-mile townships, depending on the geography. And so it was actually a way to deliver services more efficiently when we became a state and we were just villages scattered about in really a lot of farms and wildernesses. So traditionally, the core of Westerville has been in Blendon Township, and you can see that in the upper, I don't know if you can see that, you can see that in the upper right corner. Blendon Township. To the east of Blendon Township is Plain Township. To the west is Sharon Township. Directly south of us is Mifflin Township, and most people have no idea, they will in a moment, how significant Mifflin Township has been to the development of our school district. To the east of Mifflin Township is Jefferson Township. To the west is Clinton Township, which comprises most of North Columbus. If I had a map of Delaware County, directly to the north of Blendon Township would obviously be Genoa Township. To the east, to the right of Genoa Township would be Harlem Township, and then Orange Township to the left. And so what we have as we continue to go through, and again, we were a state since 1803, but it wasn't until 1825 when we had our very first school law passed. And we were among one of the first in the country to have our schools funded with public tax dollars. But they didn't create a comprehensive statewide system. We had 1,308 townships. And basically what they told every township is, you figure it out. You educate the kids, and you're responsible for the kids in your township. So a year later, the township trustees of Blendon Township did just that. And they went to the informal villages that were clustering around Blendon Township and formed 6 school districts, one being Westerville, where the Westerveld family was collecting. And Blendon Corners down by Iron Pony and Waffle House down there, Cherry Bottom to the east, Village School to the south, and Central College in Hempstead over by Big Walnut Creek. And they were responsible for educating the kids in their area to the best that they could. And so as we continue on, it's 1855 when we step on the scene, and we as Westerville City Schools count ourselves as our founding year. Why? Because our community built a log cabin. We're in the game now. We have a cabin. And so we built a log cabin on Home Street. We no longer were educating kids in homes and farms and churches, but we eventually outgrew that log cabin. And in 1866, immediately following the Civil War, we built the Union School on Vine Street. It was called the Union School because it became a union of some of those Blendon Township districts. So you had Blendon Township kids who were able to come to the Union School on their wagons and their horsebacks, came to the Union School. Sharon Township kids ambled across the dusty lane from Sharon Township that today we call Main Street. How do I know it's Main Street? Because that's the only street that had a little bitty bridge over Alum Creek. And we always want to give a shout out to the class of 1876, which is our first ever graduating class of Westerville High School. But The point of that is that since 1866, students from outside of the confines of what was considered Westerville were being educated inside Westerville for 159 years. But even the Union School wasn't enough for the kids that we were starting to educate. What we know today as the old Bag of Nails in Uptown was built in 1881, for a time served as our city hall. That's where we overflowed kids from the Union School. If you've ever been to an event at the top floor, been to a couple, that's where we educated the kids that we couldn't fit into the Union School. And there's a picture, most of these pictures are courtesy of the Westerville Library, of our students in that one-room schoolhouse. And if you notice, a lot of them didn't even have shoes. This man didn't have shoes, but he sure had a tie and shirt, and he came to school clean, whether he had shoes or not. And so, as we continue on, we needed a bigger building. And so there was a community-wide effort, and we built a big, beautiful, castle-looking building on Vine Street next door to the Union School, and it was called the Vine Street School, housed 300 students. If you stand, which we call Emerson today, from the street and look at Emerson, to the right of Emerson is a white house. That white house is where the Union School once stood. And so there's an older picture of Emerson right there, very beautiful school, very celebrated. The president of Ohio State came to open it. The governor of Ohio, Asa Bushnell, came to open it. But it had a lot of amenities that wasn't added to the school yet. For example, it did not have running water. It did not have indoor toiletries. You had to go outside to an outhouse. Nor did it have electricity until 1914. And because of those deficiencies, there was concern that the building was not adequate to educate kids. The one we're still educating kids in today, put a couple dollars into it since then. And so our community formed, Westerville Citizens for Better Schools, because we needed a more modern facility. And in 1923, we opened up Westerville High School. Today we call it Hamby. Where did we build it? We built it towards the south, because our growth was to the south of town, not to the north, where St. Paul is. We started at that point accepting students from Genoa Township who could make it to secondary school at Westerville High School. We charged them $1 tuition. Sharon Township students continued to amble over across the bridge on Main Street. We started now taking secondary students from Central College. And we also started taking students from Minerva Park. Now, Minerva Park was the brainchild of Westerville resident Gary Meeker. Gary Meeker understood that for Westerville to be successful economically, it needed to be connected to the capital city of Columbus by railway, which was 10 miles away. Gary Meeker worked for the Columbus Central Railway, and he had a farm about halfway. And so the railway built an amusement park on his farm so that as people were riding from Columbus to Westerville, they had some entertainment along the way. The president of the railway named it after his wife, Minerva Shippert, and the park was named Minerva Park. Beginning in 1924, they started building houses. The park closed in 1902. So for 101 years, students south of 161 have been taking transportation to come to Westerville schools. But even at that point, Emerson wasn't enough, and we had to build Longfellow in 1931, which then was considered out of town, further to the south. And there is a picture. That's Columbus. That's High Street in 1910. You can see the trolley cars and the trolley lines. There's actually only one car in the whole picture. The rest are horses and buggies. Now, if I'm standing on High Street in the middle of the street, like this photographer obviously is, I'm looking south on High Street. To my right is the Nationwide complex. To my left would be the Hyatt Regency. Over my shoulder to the left would be the Convention Center. So I'm looking down past Long, past Gay, past Spring Street. Way down on the left would be the Capitol building. And they would take the trolley to the trolley line that was built down State Street in Westerville. And you can see, looking south down State Street, to the left of the picture is the old Bag of Nails, which is still here. And to the right is the coffee shop that is still here. And how did you get from Columbus 10 miles away to Westerville? You went through Minerva Park. And I don't know about you, but it looks like they're going into Jurassic Park rather than Minerva Park. But that's how they got from Columbus to Westerville. And so one of the things that we like to to share. Here you have one of the first ever classes of the Westerville High School in 1924. Some of those kids may have come from Genoa Township and paid tuition. Some of those kids may have rolled across the bridge on Main Street from Sharon Township. Some of those kids may have taken the trolley up from Minerva Park. And we also want to highlight that right here is the namesake of our newest elementary school, Miss Minerva France. And so as we continue to amble on through the 20th century, in 1949, Sharon Township, to that point, had been its own school district, but it dissolved. Worthington took the western 2/3. We, in Westerville, took the eastern part of Sharon Township. We also took Minerva Park, who was educating kids in the elementary school and sending their kids to secondary. It was just easier to just take them all. So in 1949, we took Minerva Park and we took Sharon Township, the eastern part. And we built a school to accommodate for that. We built Minerva Park Elementary School on Cleveland Avenue. Now you may look puzzled. What do you mean Minerva Park Elementary School on Cleveland Avenue? I've never heard of that. Well, we'll see what happens to that in a little bit. We also grew and built Whittier under great protest. The board at the time received hundreds of petitions from parents not to build Whittier where it is. Why? Because that beautiful bike trail about a block away with the train station park was a real train and a real train station, and they did not want their kids crossing a very busy Pacific train station going back and forth. And so Central College in 1955 also consolidated with us, and we built an elementary for them, which Mr. Doran tore down a few years ago. And then we also built Hawthorne Elementary as Minerva Park continued to grow. And here's another question that we continue to get that people do not understand why. And that question is, why do the Westerville City School boundaries go all the way down to Morse Road and Cleveland Avenue and Morse Road and Hamilton Road? And again, challenge your beliefs on why you think we're educating students from that area. Because in 1955, by then, all of Blendon Township had consolidated with Westerville schools. All of their buildings, all of their students. If you were in 8th grade in 1955, which Miss Peg Duffy was, and she shared that with me, she had no idea what high school she was going to go to. I don't know if I'm going to go to Mifflin or Westerville or wherever. And so they all consolidated in Westerville City Schools. And I would contend that if we would have adjusted our name, because it was not unusual for townships and the towns growing within them to consolidate their services. But a lot of school districts around us kept both names. For example, you've got New Albany Plain local schools, Gahanna Jefferson schools, Groveport Madison schools. And I would contend if we were Westerville Blendon schools, maybe some of the confusion we have wouldn't be there. And so there is Blendon Township, and that is the boundaries of Blendon Township. County line in Cleveland, county line in Schott, down to Morse in Cleveland and Morse in Hamilton. Since 1955, those have been our official boundary footprints, although we've been educating kids from that area, throughout that area, since the 19th century. And so it was a different place at the time because it wasn't full of neighborhoods, it was full of farms, and it was full of forests back in 1950 and 55. And so there's a picture of Columbus in 1950, right when we were consolidating with Sharon Township, Central College, and on the cusp of getting Blendon. And you can see Columbus, and by default, the boundaries of Columbus Public Schools was nowhere near the footprint and the boundaries of Westerville City Schools. At the very tippy top of Columbus, that's Morse Road. They were miles away from what Westerville served. And so we had a problem, though. And it was not a kumbaya, let's take all of these kids. Because we took Sharon Township kids. We took all of Blendon Township. We took Central College. And it was not a unanimous board decision. In fact, it was a 3-2 contentious decision to take them. Why? Because we had no room. We didn't have any room for all of these kids that we were taking. So what do you do when you have no room in your schools? You build another school. And in 1960, that's just what we did, because we took Blendon and Central College and Sharon and Minerva. We had to build another high school. And so we built James Russell Lowell High School in 1960. But fortunately, that name just didn't stick, and we call it by a different name today. And so now here's where the wheels on the bus start getting wobbly. Because while all of this was happening, in 1954, the state board was created. Now, we had been a state for 150 years without a board governing the education of our children. The responsibility that they were given was they were to approve any boundary annexation of school districts. Before then, it was automatic. If the city of Westerville grew, Westerville schools grew. If the city of Columbus grew, Columbus Public Schools automatically grew with them. Beginning in 1955, it was no longer automatic. You had to ask. And from 55 to 65, every time the city of Columbus grew, they allowed Columbus Public Schools to grow with them. But in 1965, the State Board of Education denied 8 of 9 Columbus Public Schools annexation requests. After 1965, they stopped it all together, and you started to get a separation between the city of Columbus and Columbus Public Schools. And there's the city of Columbus in 1965. And I have, some theories of why, when they got to that point, did they stop allowing the Columbus Public Schools to grow. There's Columbus Public Schools in 1965. It's almost identical. You can even see pieces and parts of the city of Columbus where Columbus Public Schools could not grow. And so there's Columbus in 1965, virtually the identical footprint of Columbus Public Schools in 1965. But look at the growth of Columbus in the next 20 years that Columbus Public Schools was not permitted to do. In 20 years, you can see that the city of Columbus completely surrounded Upper Arlington, completely surrounded Worthington, grew out into the west where Hilliard was, grew up through and beyond us to New Albany, and way out to the southeast into Groveport. Significant growth of the city of Columbus that did not take Columbus Public Schools with them. And then there was Mifflin, and if the wheels on the bus got wobbly, they're about to come off right about now. Because in 1960s, Mifflin Township, like Blendon, like Sharon, was its own school district. And if you grew up in this town and you knew anything about Mifflin Township, the 3 main arteries through Mifflin are Stelzer Road, Sunbury Road, and Westerville Road. And there was a lot of nothing there. When I was in high school, between the airport and Morse Road, there was nothing. No Easton, no communities, nothing but woods. Mifflin Township goes down to about 5th Avenue, Morse Road down to about 5th Avenue. And so they had no tax base. And without a tax base, they became insolvent and bankrupt. So in 1970, I was born by then, Columbus Public Schools agreed to annex Mifflin Township Schools and their 3,200 students, staff, and buildings, but they weren't going to take it for free. They're not going to take a bankrupt district for free. What did they want? They wanted $23 million worth of Columbus City land in the suburban school districts. And they kind of said, hey, remember 1965 when we kept asking to grow and you didn't let us grow? We want some of that land. And there was some back and forth, and on April 12th, 1971, the state board agreed to transfer Mifflin Schools and the compensation land to Columbus Public Schools. Well now, what did Columbus Public Schools get? I'm glad you asked. They had a change in their boundaries. They had an area which they called the Golden Finger, which was very valuable land on Route 33 between Grandview and Dublin. Some properties on the southwest side, southwest side, and they wanted some areas between Route 161 and Westerville Road. Westerville Road and Carl Road, because that was the new hot spot of development in Columbus. In the 1960s, it was Morse Road. They built Northland Mall. They built all these communities. This was the new hot spot. But there was just one problem. Those were Westerville City Schools neighborhoods that they wanted. And so when you look at this evolution between 1971 and 72, Mifflin students became Columbus Public School students. All of their staff, all of their community, all of their buildings. And the other school districts that were impacted to lose territory to Columbus all sued to stop the transfer. Southwestern City, Grandview, Dublin, Westerville, we all sued to stop the transfer of our territories. Well, in 1976, it went all the way to the Ohio Supreme Court, and they said that the State Board of Education was within their bounds to transfer the boundaries. They were desperate to get rid of Mifflin and would do whatever. So these are the number of students that were lost to Columbus Public Schools beginning the 1976-1977 school year. Dublin lost 205 students to Columbus Public Schools. Southwestern City lost 120 students to Columbus Public Schools. Grandview lost two. I hope, what are they, it's like the Addams Family House? They got picked out of everyone. And then Westerville, we lost 2,500 students. 25% of our student population was lost to Columbus Public Schools, and it utterly devastated our community. The only kids that could stay were seniors. And so what did we lose? That right there. So let me acclimate you. All the colors are our elementary boundaries. You can see 270 carving through. There's 161 slicing right through the middle. Here's Wilder, here's Minerva, here's the district office right here, Westerville Road, Cleveland Avenue, wants to kind of give you your bearings. We lost all of that. The community of Northgate and the community of, or Eastgate, Northgate, and Northtown. We lost Forest Park. We lost all of that. All of that was Westerville City Schools. And here's what is kind of the slap in the face. Within that circle is Beechcroft High School. And so all the while, everyone in that community of Northgate were begging the board, do something to protect us. We moved, we built our house here to go to Westerville City Schools. While they were reaching out to their state representatives, while they were in court, Beechcroft High School opened in 1976. They began building it in 1973, which means all the while all of that was happening, a high school from Columbus Public Schools was being built right in the middle of their neighborhood. So kind of think that was a foregone conclusion. All of that, homes, taxes, people. And so what was the impact? Since we built Westerville South High School in 1960, we went on a building growth tear unseen since Olentangy. We built Huber in 1964. We built Walnut Springs. Westerville South was opened as a junior-senior high. They could not hold all the kids. And not only did we build Huber in 1964, we had to add on to it in 67 and again in 72. Same with Walnut Springs. We had to add on to it. Before the paint dried on Walnut Springs, we had to turn around and build a second junior high school in Blendon in 69, so forth and so on. So in 1975, we opened the second high school, the first suburb, not only in Columbus, but one of the first in the state of Ohio to need to build a second high school. We built that from a bond package for $7 million. Probably couldn't do that today, I don't think. Probably couldn't build a gym for that. And then 1976 hit, and we lost 25% of our school district. That prompted us to close and sell Minerva Park Elementary School that was built to service the Sharon Township kids. We sold it for $70,000. Minerva Park Elementary School has been sold several times and has since been torn down. The only thing left of Minerva Park Elementary School is the school bell that says Minerva on it that is inside of Hawthorne. So devastated were we by what we lost is that we didn't build another school for 13 years. We built 9 in 11 years, didn't build another one for 13. That one sat empty, which was Heritage, for a year before it actually opened in 1989. We were shell-shocked about what could happen to us in the southern end of our district. Again, we gained nothing from Columbus Public Schools. We lost a ton to Columbus Public Schools. But wait, if you thought that was something, there's even more chaos happening. Because while all of this was happening, there was a storm bubbling around Columbus Public Schools, a federal discrimination suit that had been brewing since the 1960s of Columbus operating intentionally illegal, segregated schools. So much so that in 1973, a discrimination lawsuit was filed. And in 1977, federal judge Robert Duncan ruled that Columbus Public intentionally and illegally maintained a segregated school system. Judge Duncan said Columbus Public Schools was two different school systems. It was a school system for white students and a school system for black students. And he ordered busing to desegregate kids. That went all the way to the U.S. Supreme Court, which unanimously agreed with Judge Duncan. And on September 4th, 1979, my 5th grade year, busing started in Columbus. So now, imagine, I am a Northgate family who built my house there to go to Westerville City Schools. We built Amherst to help support that community. And now my kids are leaving Westerville South High School and have to go to Beechcroft. But before my youngest one can get to Beechcroft, now I'm getting bused. And I'm getting bused to Lyndon McKinley, or I'm getting bused to Mifflin High School. It was utter, utter chaos. And so how did the suburbs respond? In fear. They all passed a levy under the threat of losing their common areas, their areas that they served within the city of Columbus, to Columbus Public Schools. And we just, we're fretting over how much can our community take in today in 4.9, is it 3.9, is it 5.9? In a 3-year span, we passed 19.4 mills. 19.4 mills in 3 years. And there's Harold Road, the superintendent of Westerville at the time, and said threats of insolvency and consequently consolidation with Columbus had a tendency to soften the tax attitude of the people in the suburbs. And there's a quote from Robert Weiler, whose son Skip and his family are big supporters of our school district, who was a Columbus Board of Education member at the time, said suburban officials used Columbus in every way possible. The threat that their kids would go into Columbus was the greatest motivation for supporting the suburban schools. How do you think the suburban schools got their bond issues passed? If we don't pass, we'll go into Columbus. Every one of them passed. Mr. Weiler, by the way, gave me my diploma as a board member in high school. And so much was going on that the Board of Education of Columbus Public began to threaten to get all of the city of Columbus. And it was chaos. And so in 1980, right after busing began, the State Board of Education halted all transfers in the state, boundary transfers. They did it again every biennium. They did it again in 82, did it again in 84, got to 86 and said, we can't do this forever. We want the suburban districts in Columbus to come together and figure out something. And that's what they did. And they figured out something that's called the Win-Win Agreement in 1986. And the Win-Win Agreement had 3 provisions: that existing boundaries will remain intact. We didn't gain anything from Columbus Public Schools through the Win-Win. We protected what we already had. We protected the kids we've been educating since the 19th century. Imagine Strawberry Farms saying, don't let what happened to our Northgate folks happen to us. Protect us. But there's an asterisk, because any township land annexed to the city of Columbus after that automatically became Columbus Public Schools, no questions asked. And it was a significant roll of the dice for us to build Wilder in 1989 in Blendon Township, because if the city of Columbus would have ever annexed them, they would have automatically become Columbus Public Schools. They would have had to have assurances from the city of Columbus that they weren't going to do that. And new commercial land within our areas of Columbus that we serve, we shared taxes with them. And at our peak, we cut a check annually of $2.5 million to Columbus Public Schools. And it renewed every 3 years. And there was chaos every 3 years. Would the suburbs stay with the win-win agreement? And there are the win-win boundaries. Everything you see is the city of Columbus. What is shaded are city of Columbus serviced by suburban school districts. We're number 9 up in here. And you can see the areas where Columbus came into our area that we educate. What is solid is Columbus Public Schools. You don't see a number where Worthington is, because in the 1960s, they made their own deal with Columbus Public to preserve the Anheuser-Busch plant. So Dr. Good, who was here, and when he was here, he hated the win-win agreement. And when he retired from here and became the superintendent of Columbus, the first thing he did was end it. And so when he ended it, the boundaries would remain forever intact of the suburban boundaries, no matter what Columbus, the city, annexed. No more tax payments. We did a 5-year phase out of our tax share payments to Columbus City Schools. And what that prompted was the Blendon Township part of the eastern part of our district, on the other side of the reservoir, people felt comfortable now, developers building communities, because now there was no threat that they could go to Columbus Public Schools. And so a reminder, everyone who lives within our boundaries, no matter their jurisdiction, their property taxes equally pay for Westerville schools. So there you have Columbus in 1965, if you remember, and I outlined in magenta Blendon Township, and you can see Columbus Public Schools today, almost identical to 1965. They've never been in our space. If you look at this circle here to the left, that's the golden finger that they took from Dublin, and they built a high school for their Dublin families, Centennial. You can see down here, that's the Mifflin Township area that they took, and they built a new high school for their Mifflin families, which exist today. And this yellow circle that's hard to see, that's what they took from us. That's the Sharon Township land Columbus Public took from us, and they built a high school for the Westerville families. They built Beechcroft High School. You see these islands of Columbus Public Schools? Those islands represent the growth of the city of Columbus since 1986. And you have those discontiguous islands around that are Columbus Public Schools. And so here's like a brief video that shows the growth of Columbus. You can see Columbus in the 1970s, all the way into the 1900s, 1909, 1927, 1946. There's 1965, and you'll see the growth of Columbus into our area. We didn't grow into Columbus's area. Columbus grew into our area. And so one of the things that we looked at, and here's our school district, and what this scatter plotting is that this, back in October, is every single kid that was in high school in Westerville. The kids in bright red go to Westerville South. The kids in cardinal go to Westerville North. The kids in black go to Westerville Central. And you see these stars that indicate where the schools are located, because we get asked all the time, why are we busing so many kids from the southern end of our district? But you now can understand why we were not confident to build a school. This C down here was the other site that was considered for Westerville Central, behind Iron Pony in Casto Park. And there was great reservation for building a school. Now, when you look at the map, it looks like it makes sense there. So we hear all the time, why don't kids just go to the school they live closest to? Well, Mr. Dorn and I did an exercise, more Dorn than me, and we bisected the school districts to extract out the kids that live the closest to the high schools. And on October 23rd, Central, 722 kids of our 45 in high school lived closest to Central. 663 lived closest to North. 3,160 of our kids lived closest to Westerville South. We couldn't build a building big enough to hold them. In fact, of the kids that live closest to North and Central, they only equal 1,385. That's smaller than any high school we have now. And so you can see the decisions that were made in the 70s and 80s impacted our decisions and our transportation and school locations to this day. And so now when you look at our footprint, you're like, okay, I've got a decent understanding of, we've taken Genoa Township kids ever since Hanby was built. We've taken all of Blendon Township since '55, but unofficially since the 19th century. And you can see how the townships have grown. The remaining Sharon Township kids, Plain Township, what's left of Blendon Township that hasn't been annexed. I want to draw your attention to this circle right there, because the city of Westerville has also grown. It has grown into Genoa Township. It has also grown outside the boundaries of Westerville City Schools. This is Orange Township. The kids who live within the city of Westerville, right in here, if they're in high school, they go to Olentangy Orange High School, living in the city of Westerville. Olentangy did not take any schools from Westerville City Schools. Westerville grew into Olentangy, just like Westerville City Schools never took any kids from Columbus Public Schools. The city of Columbus grew into Westerville. And we talk about, well, it's Westerville schools. Why don't we just educate the kids from Westerville? Well, if we did, of our 52 square miles as a school district, only 12 of them are the city of Westerville. Of our 1,400 and almost 14,700 kids, only 4,700 live in Westerville. Only 32%, a third of our kids, are actually Westerville City kids. However, when you look at the kids we educate from Columbus, that we've always educated from that area, 5,800 come from the city of Columbus, and that does not include the other 400 that are in Minerva Park. That makes up 40% of our school district currently. And so, now that you have a better understanding of that, you're capable to say, I understand why we educate down to Morse Road, why we educate who we educate, and how long have we educated them. And we are all the Ville as a result of it. So thank you. Any questions?
Thank you so much for this very informative presentation. I know I'm leaving with a lot of fun facts, so thank you. Could you kind of share with us other reasons why we may be obligated to service other students, whether it's federal requirements, or could you just kind of share other reasons why we may have a responsibility to educate other students?
Well, obviously, we have the responsibility to educate the students that we have within our school district, no matter what municipality annexed into and took up the township. We also educate more than 100 students that live as far away as Canal Winchester because they are either foster care students, maybe homeless or whatever, that we are still obligated to educate them through no fault of their own circumstance. And so we have students who are special education Westerville City School students that may be placed at a facility that can properly care for them, that may be outside the footprint of Westerville City Schools. So yes, there's quite a few that we are still responsible for educating, even outside of the large footprint that we have.
Thank you. You know, I love history.
Yeah, I know you do.
I love history. But I think it's just so important that people understand this. So I know as part of the board meeting, this will go up. I'm hoping we can excerpt this. And I know I will share it. So I think your presentation gave us a great answer to the question, or maybe a retort to the comment. When people say, why don't we just give those win-win kids back? You've thought about it a lot. So if someone says that to you, how do you respond in a succinct manner?
I just start off by saying the kids that are in the area of Columbus down to Morse Road, we've been educating them long before the city of Columbus got that far, since the 19th century, and that Columbus grew into our space, and those kids were never, ever educated by Columbus Public Schools.
Great, thank you.
I know a lot of our board members are aware, but, we heard this a lot when we were on the campaign circuit in the fall. And so we just thought it was really important and really want to spread the word to our community about this. We've been told multiple times, if you would give Columbus their kids back, you wouldn't need a levy. And so I think Scott does a great job of this. We are going to absolutely excerpt it. I know Melanie and her team are working on some different ways we can get this information out to our community, but I think it's really, really important. The stat that really hit me was when you think about 12 of the 52 square miles being actually the city of Westerville. We focused a lot on Columbus, obviously, because that's the one we hear a lot, and that's where a lot of our population density is. But again, thinking about Genoa Township is also not the city of Westerville. So
That's right.
just really appreciate all the work Scott's put into it, and we continue to get great feedback when he gives it. So I appreciate you giving it to us, this presentation to us tonight.
And when you look at perspective, 4,700 kids, that's 1 high school, 2 middle schools, 3, maybe 4 elementary schools, and that's it. If we only educated the city of Westerville, we would be far less than what we are right now.
Yeah, and just something that dawned on me, you talk about how New Albany has two names, and many others. I can't even imagine if we put all these into one, how long that would take. But it would definitely help people understand for sure. But
I think you said one time when I first started here, you said we really should be called Northeast City Schools, kind of like Southwest City Schools is made up of lots of
right.
different municipalities on the opposite side of 270. And that kind of
Yeah.
resonated with me as well.
although I think people would probably be even more confused.
More
Like,
confused
what does
like
that mean?
Yeah. Well, people who are not from here, one, do not understand
Yeah.
this, and then don't understand why we're Westerville on the east side of Columbus. And they said, well, maybe that's just how you do directions, because Central is,
Yeah.
On that note, any other questions?
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
We've seen that a few times, so I really appreciate it. Next up, we have the superintendent's comments. Angie.
Yes, I will be brief tonight. I just wanted to thank our communications team. It's been working on a nice one-pager, which we're about to send out to the community. So that'll be coming out this week, but we are working on our priorities for the Fair School Funding Plan, which is our state-level funding. And with this will be a template that community members can use if they're interested in reaching out to legislators. So it'll be a template that can be used either for writing an email or as a transcript if you want to make a phone call with some of that information. But really focusing on making sure that we advocate for keeping our state share stable with our funding, with making sure that we are looking at the true funding cost for special education. That's a big one, and looking at what that really takes to run special education programs for our students. Fully funding the plan at the full phase and amount that was promised. Stopping unfunded mandates. There are lots of different initiatives and mandates that come out of our state that, you know, many of them we think are great for kids, but unfortunately they come with hundreds of thousands of dollars in costs that are often not provided along with those mandates. And finally, we want to make sure that we're advocating to make sure that they are updating the cost inputs to make sure that the cost to educate a child is reflecting the current rates. So those are all on this document. So if you live in the district, if you're a parent, watch for that. That'll be coming out soon. We, again, just would really appreciate any support. I've been talking to legislators. I know Nicole's had multiple meetings as well. Many of our board members have had the opportunity to talk with our legislators, but it does mean a lot to them when they hear it from community members. We know that as our state funding continues to decrease, it does place additional burden on our local community members with our property taxes. And so we really want to make sure that we're getting the funding that we need for our students so that we don't have to keep coming back and asking for additional money in local property tax. So appreciate any help. And Nicole and I are always happy to chat with people about this, answer any questions that you have. And that's all I have tonight.
I'm hoping, so we talk a lot about the inputs, right? And them lagging in terms of like 2022. So I'm just wondering if you can clarify that for people, because I think that point is a little bit confusing.
Yeah, I think it's intentionally confusing. So the current funding formula that we have, when they are looking at what is the cost to educate a child, they're using costs from 2022. While they've continued to account for inflation for our local wealth factor, so what is our ability to pay as a community, they've accounted for inflationary increases with updated property values, updated income values, but what they haven't done is account for inflationary increases on the costs, which, as that math works, just decreases our state funding overall. And so I am working on a presentation to share out with the community. I will have it when we come back in March for the updated forecast. I'll have that as built into that as well. So I think that I would encourage anybody that's interested in school funding and seeing our schools be appropriately and fairly funded, as they are required to do, as the state of Ohio is required to do under our state constitution. Our school funding has been unconstitutional since 1997. We would like to see the state do what it is supposed to do.
And we will be giving the presentation that Nicole talked about. We will be going around and sharing that and talking about this flyer as well with our PTAs and our staffs and some other community groups over the upcoming next couple of months as well.
And if anyone has a group they want us to come present to, please reach out and let us know. We'd be glad to do it.
I just have a I know you also talk a lot about how much we get per pupil in our, for our Westerville City School District kids, and how much, private entities get. So could you just remind us?
Yeah, so on average, we're funded about $3,000 per student that that live in our district and we educate. Private schools receive private vouchers in the amount of $6,000, over $6,000 for a K-8 student, anyone in kindergarten through 8th grade, and up to $8,400 for a student in 9-12. So $3,000 for us, $6,000 or $8,400, depending on the grade level, in vouchers for private schools.
So just thinking about how much we are getting, right? And thinking about, the FY 2022 number.
It's based on FY '22 costs, yeah.
So we're still not getting enough of funding to actually meet our.
And they haven't fully funded it to date. Right now, they've only implemented 67% of the plan. As Angie talked about, special education costs. So what does it cost to educate a child? The state has done cost studies on the actual costs of educating students with special needs, and there's several different categories within there. They've had it since November of 2022. It was a study that they commissioned, that they used the American Institute for Research that performed the cost studies. It's on the Ohio Department of Education and Workforce's website if anybody's interested. So they have a study, but they haven't. That's just one of the many studies that they've done, but they haven't. That's the big one that they haven't inputted into the. So not only are they not accounting for inflation with the costs, but they also haven't updated it for what does it actually cost in the formula. So, but all the while they continue to update our local wealth factors so that we look wealthier, which shifts that cost more to our local community.
I just want to follow up and correct me if I'm thinking incorrectly about this. So, say I have a child who attends Westerville schools and they're in 9th grade, hypothetically speaking. And what Westerville is getting is about $3,000 to educate that child.
On average.
On average, from the state.
Yes.
The rest of it is made up from local property taxes and a mix of a couple other things. Take that same child and say, I'm taking them out of Westerville. I want to use a voucher to send them to a private school.
Yeah.
They're a high schooler. That school is going to get over $8,000 for that child to attend.
Yes, $8,408. There are some like income requirements, but it's a very high threshold.
Okay, thank you.
But everyone gets a voucher.
Yeah.
And just for clarity, when that voucher of public money goes to the private entity, are there any particular requirements that that private entity has to show what the money is going towards, that they have to provide, report card statuses?
So the chartered non-public schools, so the chartered private schools that receive vouchers, there are some requirements for assessments that they create on their own.
So not state-based?
So it's not like they're not subject to the state school report card. They're not subject to state auditors' audits. I tell people we enjoy 6 months out of the year. We get to spend time with our state auditors here. They do none of that. They're not subject to public records laws. They do not have to accept students. They are allowed to have an application process, and they can say no if a student doesn't fit in their school.
Okay.
Okay, and thank you. Next up, we have public comments, and we have one person tonight. Just a reminder that the Board of Education welcomes public comment on educational issues of interest to our school community. The board does not discriminate based on identity or viewpoint of the speaker during our public participation. However, I lost my spot, I'm sorry. However, the board president may limit comments that are obscene, The board asks that speakers not identify students by name during their comments. Persons having public complaints about district personnel, programming, or operations will be referred to the process set forth in Board Policy 9130. And finally, the board reminds speakers that their statement should be directed to the board as a whole and not to individual board members. And with that, I welcome you back, Miss Mary Jean Boatler.
Oh,
Butler?
correct.
Oh, Boatler. Yes.
That rarely happens. Mary Jean Boatler. I live in the Amherst area, and I'm not here to ask you for anything. I'm not here to complain. I'm here just to say thank you. Thank you for your amazing leadership in Westerville. I know that this is a very challenging time, and it's going to get more challenging, and you get a lot of comments from detractors, but please know that the large majority of the folks in this community are so pleased with the work that you're doing. And so continue with the same creativity, imagination, tenacity, and leadership that you have led us so far. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Moving along, we have 6.01. May I have a motion to approve the minutes for the regular Board of Education meeting held on Monday, January 27th, 2025?
So moved.
Second.
Ms. Marshall?
Mrs. Lieband,
Yes.
Mrs. Valentine,
Yes.
Mrs. Altman,
Yes.
Mrs. Davidson,
Yes.
Mrs. Meyer.
Yes. And next up, we have financials, 7.01. May I have a motion to approve a resolution to Governor DeWine in the Ohio General Assembly regarding school funding priorities?
So moved.
Second?
Would you like to talk to us about this?
Would you like me to read the resolution?
That'd be great,
Okay.
yeah.
So resolution of the City of Westerville City School District Board of Education to Governor Mike DeWine and the Ohio General Assembly regarding school funding priorities. Whereas the Ohio Constitution guarantees a thorough and efficient set of common schools for all students, ensuring equitable and adequate funding for public education. And whereas the current state funding formula for public education is using costs from 2022 and does not fully account for inflationary increases in the cost of education, including teacher salaries, operational expenses, transportation, and instructional materials. And whereas cost studies for special education have identified the need for increased funding to support students with disabilities, yet the state has not fully implemented these studies into its funding model. And whereas the instability of the state share calculation creates unpredictability in school funding, making it difficult for districts to plan for long-term financial sustainability. And whereas the state's failure to fully fund the school funding formula forces local school districts to rely more heavily on local property taxes, increasing the financial burden on homeowners. And whereas local property taxes already place an unsustainable burden on residents, and the state must take action to provide relief without further eroding public school funding. And whereas House Bill 920 restricts inflationary growth on voted levies, preventing districts from receiving increased revenue to meet rising costs and effectively shifting the tax burden between local taxpayers without substantially increasing revenues and creating school funding shortfalls. And whereas unfunded mandates imposed by the state legislature place additional financial burdens on school districts, requiring them to comply with new regulations and policies without providing the necessary resources to do so effectively. And therefore be it resolved that the Westerville City Schools Board of Education urges Governor DeWine and the Ohio General Assembly to prioritize public school funding by updating the cost inputs in the school funding formula to reflect inflationary increases each year, implementing the cost studies for special education adjusted for inflation to ensure adequate resources for students with disabilities, stabilizing the state share calculation to ensure predictable and equitable funding for school districts, fully funding the state school funding formula to reduce the over-reliance on local property taxes, avoiding the imposition of additional mandates on school districts without providing dedicated funding to support their implementation, And be it further resolved that the Westerville City Schools Board of Education calls upon state policymakers to address the unintended consequences of House Bill 920, which limits school districts' ability to keep pace with rising costs and shifts the burden of school funding between local taxpayers. And be it finally resolved that a copy of this resolution be sent to Governor DeWine, members of the Ohio General Assembly, the Ohio Department of Education and Workforce, and other relevant stakeholders to advocate for necessary reforms in school funding to ensure the continued success of Ohio's public school students.
I just have one, I know that I've asked you about this, so I'm hoping that you can explain it for everyone. Could you talk a little bit about how we could stabilize the state share calculation?
Yes, I can. So the state share calculation, as I've mentioned, the state is updating it for inflationary costs based on the local wealth factor. So it's our local property values and our resident income. Right now, they're looking at a 3-year average, but they're updating that year over year, that 3-year average, while they're keeping those cost inputs at the same level. And so what they could do is keep our state share. If they're not going to update the cost inputs, they should stop updating our inflationary increases in the local wealth factor. That would be my ask to the state.
Thank you. The only other thing that I would ask, if my colleagues would be, well, I guess I'll wait and ask that. But is there any other questions? Okay, then maybe we can take the vote.
Mrs. Valentine?
Yes.
Mrs. Altman?
Yes.
Mrs. Davidson?
Yes.
Mrs. Lebian?
Yes.
Mrs. Meyer?
Yes. All right, moving along, can we take the personal consent agenda as one? All right, may I have a motion to approve the personal consent agenda 8.01 through 8.10?
So moved.
Second?
Welcome, Mr. Cooper.
Good evening, President Meyer, Vice President Leban, members of the board, Ms. Marshall, and Ms. Hamburg. Tonight's personnel consent agenda consists of regular action items with regard to resignations, retirements, leaves of absence, one-time pays, contract status changes, and other employment-related decisions. We have 3 staff members who have announced retirement on this evening's agenda. Michael Denny will be retiring at the end of the year after 30 years of service to our district. Bill Highmiller with 34 years to the district, and Stephanie Matashanik with 30 years of service in our district. We certainly appreciate all they've done for our students over their time and wish them the best in their retirement years ahead. At this time, I'm happy to answer any questions you may have.
Any questions or comments? Congratulations to the retirees and thank you for
Thank you.
their service. Ms. Marshall?
Mrs. Davidson?
Yes.
Mrs. Altman?
Yes.
Mrs. Valentine?
Yes.
Mrs. Lebian?
Yes.
Mrs. Meyer?
Yes. And is it okay if we take old business as one? Great. May I have a motion to approve old business 9.01? These are all final readings through 9.08.
So moved. Second?
Any comments, questions? No? Okay. Would you take the vote, Ms. Marshall?
Mrs. Lebian?
Yes.
Mrs. Davidson?
Yes.
Mrs. Altman?
Yes.
Mrs. Valentine?
Yes.
Mrs. Meyer?
Yes. And next up, we have new business. We have 10.01, the first reading for policy 0131.1, technical corrections. And if we could we just take 10.02, the first reading for policy 0171, review of policies, because they kind of relate to each other.
They do. Thank you.
Welcome, Mr. Dorn.
Well, good evening, President Meyer, Vice President Lieben, members of the board, Ms. Hamburg and Ms. Marshall. I will be presenting all of the next 3 policies on the agenda for this evening, but item 10.01 is bylaw 0131.1, technical corrections. This bylaw has been revised to streamline the process of making technical corrections to policies and bylaws. The bylaw defines technical corrections and authorizes the superintendent to make such corrections and provide a summary of those corrections to the board for their review. Technical corrections may include things like the consolidation of sections, transfer of sections, combining or dividing sections, renumeration of sections, chapters or titles. To be a technical correction, though, there should be no substantive changes with changing in the policy. So upon the board's review of those corrections, if it's believed that there are some substantive changes, then the policy will cycle back through the normal 2-reading process for revisions. Item 10.02 is policy 0171, and it's our current policy for reviewing policy, and it's just suggested that this bylaw be rescinded so that it doesn't conflict with the one that I just presented.
Okay. Pretty
And
self-explanatory.
10.03 is even easier. We've somehow failed to add high school students to our intra-district open enrollment policy. We've been transferring them through the open enrollment process. We just have left them out of the policy, so we just want to add them back in.
Thank you. Good. Thank you. Next up, we have 10.04, the first reading of policy 8452, automated external defibrillators, or AEDs, and cardiopulmonary resuscitation. Welcome, Ms. Pinto.
Good evening, President Meyer, members of the board, Superintendent Hamburg, and Mrs. Marshall. I am presenting policy 5452, automated external defibrillators, AEDs, and cardiopulmonary resuscitation for the first reading tonight. This policy reflects updates to align with Ohio House Bill 47. It is recommended that this policy be adopted to maintain the most current policies and best practices. Do you have any questions?
No questions, thank you. Next up, we have 10.05, the first reading of policy 2271 and College Credit Plus program. Welcome, Mr. Meisner.
Thank you. Good evening, President Meyer, Superintendent Hamburg, Mrs. Marshall, members of the board. This evening, I bring to you updated policy 2271 about the College Credit Plus program. On February 25th, 2025, Ohio Senate Bill 104 was enacted. My colleagues have probably talked about Senate Bill 104. The intent of that bill was really to update the College Credit Plus program. The law updated specific components of the program, and these included adding a second deadline for the intent to participate form that traditionally was April 1st of every calendar year. They've added a new deadline of November 1st for second semester. They updated the intent to participate form and required that we use that form unless you have prior written approval by the Chancellor of the Higher Board of Education and the Ohio Department of Education and Workforce to use a different form. So we have reached out. We did get approval to use a different form that matches us a little bit better. And then our students have to participate in a mandatory orientation about the program. That was done at the college level. We've also developed that for the high school side of that as well. So tonight I recommend that the board adopt this updated policy. Questions? Great.
Just thank you.
Yeah, thanks.
Okay. And then our last one, first reading, 10.06, policy 7421, restrooms, locker rooms, shower rooms, and changing rooms. Welcome, Ms. Dennis.
Well, good evening, President Meyer, Vice President Liban, members of the board, Superintendent Hamburg, and Treasurer Marshall. This is the first reading of a new policy that reflects the provisions of Senate Bill 104, which requires public schools and educational service centers to designate specific facilities for the exclusive use by either the male biological sex or the female biological sex. This policy reflects the provisions of current law and must be implemented in order to comply with state statute by February 25th of 2025. I'd be happy to answer any questions you might have.
No questions. Thank you.
Thank you.
All right, next up, 11, recommended action standing business. 11.01, out-of-state overnight field trips. Welcome, Ms. Baldwin.
Good evening, President Meyer, members of the board, Superintendent Hamburg, and Ms. Marshall. Tonight we have several field trips out of the country for you to consider. These are for the school year of 2027, so lots of planning ahead. These are tours that our students take with EF Tours, which has been a partner that a lot of our chaperones have used. And so I'm happy to answer any questions you may have about these trips. Students would not miss any school as a part of these trips.
They look fun.
All right.
Oh, no, I didn't. May I have a motion to approve out-of-state overnight field trips?
So moved.
Second.
Okay.
Ready?
Yeah.
Mrs. Liebman, sorry, I had zoned out too, so.
Yes.
Mrs. Davidson,
Yes.
Mrs. Altman,
Yes.
Mrs. Valentine,
Yes.
Mrs. Meyer.
Yes. And may I have a motion to approve the early graduate candidates who have completed all local and state requirements?
So moved.
Second.
All right, good evening again. So this evening, these students are before you to be approved upon their completion of their graduation requirements. We expect them to complete them before their cohort in May, and so they will receive their diploma and transcript once they finalize all of their requirements. And I'm happy to answer any questions you may have.
Just congratulations to the 23 students. Great.
Thank you.
Take the roll. Yep.
Mrs. Altman,
Yes.
Mrs. Liebman,
Yes.
Mrs. Davidson,
Yes.
Mrs. Valentine,
Yes.
Mrs. Meyer.
Yes. Next up, we have board comments. Who would like to start us off? Anybody?
Well, I would like to start us off by saying Happy Black History Month. I also want to echo Superintendent Hamburg's comments earlier. You know, we are actively, asking community members to sign up and support us in the legislative process. And so if you are someone that wants to help advocate for a fair school funding, please reach out. And that is all on my end.
I just wanted to follow up on that. And, well, first of all, I want to say congratulations to the graduates. I just always love that. And on that, if folks want to help and be part of the process, can one of you summarize how they can best do that and let us know?
Yes, they're welcome to reach out to either of us. We're compiling a list that we'll be sending updates to. So this will go out to all of our families, but if there's anyone outside that doesn't have a current student, if you email us or call the office, we can make sure you get on our email list.
Great, thank you.
And as Nicole mentioned, we are always happy to come out and speak to groups as well.
I'm going to tag on to the, speaking of the finances and pushing on the state ledge. So a couple of things. So Governor DeWine in his budget recommendations did put in for full funding of the Fair School Funding Formula, which is great. However, to Nicole's point, it didn't update the 2022 numbers for costs. So correct, but it still updates the local wealth factor. So what that would essentially do, I was in a meeting earlier today, and it would actually lower the state's funding share to a level that is lower than when the original DeRolf case was decided in 1997. They on average, it was about 46% then. It would be about 35% is what the state would be funding us at on average. So something to keep in mind as we are continuing to press our legislators and the governor as to where we're at with the school funding and why this is so important. The State House will be working on the budget between now and about mid to late March. That's how long we have to lobby the state ledge, or on the House side. The budget will then go to the Senate. They will have some time over in the Senate, and then it goes into kind of a conference committee, which is basically a behind closed doors hashing out of things. That budget will not be seen again until the end of June when it needs to be voted on. So now is the time to be pressing, especially the state House members, because now is the time where they're building the budget. Also wanted to put a plug in for an organization called All In for Ohio Kids. They have a website. It is currently being updated, but they are all in for Ohio kids, for public schools, and they will be having toolkits and webinars and whatnot to help people that would like to help the public schools in this aspect and other aspects. So, and congratulations to the graduates, and that's it for me.
So I want to say congratulations to the graduates also this evening, and I hope I get your name right, Mrs. Boatletter? Close? Your comments were very kind and very welcoming, so thank you so much for those tonight and for coming and taking time out of your night to do that. It truly means a lot. And I think I missed one other thing. Got one more thing left. So at the conclusion of the March 17th meeting, I will be officially resigning as a member of the Board of Education. I don't want to cry. It's about time and timing and the season in my life. I love this district. This district deserves someone sitting in this seat that's going to can give it its full attention. I have some things on my plate that are absolutely wonderful. This amazing nonprofit that's exploding. And right now, with everything going on in the world, those kids need my time right now. My family needs my time. And you guys are so strong. Like right now, the leadership on this board is the strongest it's been in the 12 years I've been here. So I feel really good about that, passing that baton over to you. To Angie, I am so happy you have joined us. I believe in you immensely. I know you're going to take us where we need to go. And Nicole, same with you. I mean, this is a dream come true. For the last 12 years, this is all that I've hoped and wanted and dreamt for, like a fully functioning board that's all doing the work and rowing in the same direction. I know we hear things outside grumbling that think that, you know, all women up here is not enough. We are enough. We deserve these seats. I know whomever you choose will be amazing. And I'm super excited about that. And the reason I'm giving a little bit of time is because I won't be here at the next meeting. And I want people in Westerville to apply for this seat. This is a life-changing seat, and you get to work with amazing people. So that's it.
Okay. I want to echo my colleagues' comments about Black History Month, the graduates, the retirees, our FAUST Award winners. It's just really all inspiring. And I just want to not cry too. Gosh, I'm a sympathy crier, I'm sorry. And just say with deep gratitude, I want to thank you, Tracy, for your 12 years of dedicated service on the Westerville City School Boards of Education. Your unwavering commitment to our students, the staff, our community has left a lasting impression and impact. And through your leadership, advocacy for education equity, and dedication to student success, you have helped shape a brighter future for Westerville schools. Your passion for supporting all learners, especially those facing hardships, has made a real change in countless lives. And as a mom, an aunt of kids in the districts, and a colleague, I truly appreciate your years of service, and it's bittersweet that I say congratulations. Thank you. I know it's not your last night, but it's just, it is bittersweet. Yeah. So just thank you. And with that, let's see, where are we? We are meeting here again on regular session on Monday, February 24th of 2025 at 6 p.m. at the Early Learning Center, which is here. And that's 936 Eastwind Drive, Westerville, Ohio, 43081. And with that, may I have a motion to enter into an executive session for the purposes of preparing for conducting or reviewing negotiations with employees regarding their compensation or other terms and conditions of their employment?
So moved.
Second.
You take the roll?
Mrs. Altman?
Yes.
Mrs. Valentine?
Yes.
Mrs. Davidson?
Yes.
Mrs. Lieband?
Yes.
Mrs. Meyer?
Yes. You're welcome to stay, or you could go home.
7:24.
Thank you. All right. May I have a motion to, what?
Just adjourn, yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah, sorry.
that's what, okay. May I have a motion to adjourn?
So moved.
Second.
Ms. Marshall?
Mrs. Valentine?
Yes.
Mrs. Altman?
Yes.
Mrs. Leben?
Yes.
Mrs. Meyer?
Yes.